Pokemon based on inanimate objects are among the most hated Pokemon of this whole franchise. This is especially true of Gen 1ers who feel that later gens went overboard on the inanimate designs. I won't get too into that. But I know I'm part of the problem. Look at my worst designs videos. I've talked about at least one inanimate object Pokemon in every video so far, and that's probably going to be true of most generations. But here's the thing. All the times that I've complained about inanimate object Pokemon, it's because those designs, like Magneton for example, are poorly executed, not because I'm against inanimate objects as basis for Pokemon. And there are actually a lot of inanimate object Pokemon that I really like. So how about we have a closer look at these hated Pokemon and see if they really deserve all of this animosity. To help me out with this discussion, I'd like to bring in Mew. They're actually doing a playthrough of Pokemon Black specifically focused around inanimate object Pokemon.
As we say over on my channel, hello Franz, Mew here, and yes, I am a staunch inanimate object Poke defender. People just say that they're things with faces, and that's not giving them a fair shake.
Just to be very clear about what we're talking about here, we're going to focus on Pokemon that are exclusively based on inanimate objects. So something like a Blastoise that is partly based on a war tank but is mostly a tortoise doesn't count. Or something like an Exploud, which obviously has traits of a pipe organ but that are interpreted as something that definitely looks alive, also doesn't count.
There are some borderline Pokemon that are clearly inanimate but have some animate features like Geodude's very humanoid hands, or are based on inanimate objects but themselves aren't animate beings, like Claydol being based on, well, clay dolls. We're not counting those either. Meowth is another one. It's based on a Maneki Neko, but like Exploud, it's very much an animal, so that doesn't count.
So the Pokemon we're talking about here are the most inanimate of the inanimate object Pokemon. But what is it about these guys that makes people hate them so much? When I was doing some research into the arguments that people use against inanimate object Pokemon, there were three main points that kept coming up. One of them is that it's easier to make attachments to creatures that are more animalistic than everyday or household objects. It is a bit hard to see how you're supposed to make an emotional connection to a giant snowflake or a bunch of gears. But many cultures have or had concepts along the lines of animism, which is the view that everything, including objects, have a spiritual essence and are deserving of respect. Shinto, the traditional religion of Japan, is one of those cultures. So it makes sense that Pokemon, a franchise that pulls so heavily from Japanese culture, would have creatures that are based on objects that you can make a connection with. Klinklang is a rather poor one in this regard, but look at Minior or Honedge. These Pokemon are no more animate than a Klinklang, but they have personalities that make them lovable. It helps that Minior is adorable, but this shows that you don't have to be animate to be personable.
Can I jump in and defend my boy Klinklang for a minute? Because it gets a particularly bad rap, which is mostly unfair. Klinklang has clearly evolved to survive alongside humans in an urban atmosphere, which is why it purposefully doesn't have a clear face. It wants to blend in with machinery. This has the added benefit of making it useful to humans, who are more likely to take it in and protect it from the wild. I think Game Freak really dropped the ball by not having them inhabit places like power plants, where its machinery-like body would have made a lot more sense. But no, put him in a cave. Good one, Game Freak.
The second big argument against inanimate object Pokemon is that they're unnatural. They don't behave like animals, or the way they move just doesn't look or feel right. And it's true that Roggenrola moves sort of robotically. It kind of reminds me of a wind-up toy. And I don't see much sense in the Vanillish line floating. They're just ice types. But again, that's a matter of execution. Tons of inanimate Pokemon float, and for the most part, we don't question it. There are the ghost types like Chandelure, so of course they float, or psychic types like Bronzong, which I guess can telekinesis themselves off the ground, or fairy types like Klefki that presumably can float with magic, or even electric and steel types like Magnemite that supposedly float with electromagnetism.
Most of the inanimate object Pokemon float, and to be honest, they make more sense than the fish Pokemon that do the same thing, but those are all the floaty ones, and they move naturally enough. And even something like a Voltorb, it doesn't float, it rolls, so we accept that too. It's definitely possible to make inanimate object Pokemon seem natural. Palossand's movement is a great example of this. They swing their tower-like arms to get the momentum to shuffle across the ground. Perfect, especially in a sand-heavy region like Alola, to which they're native. Kartana is another great example, using its light paper-like form to simply glide on the air.
But by far, the biggest complaint against these Pokemon is that they are too simple and not creative. Just stick a face on it and call it a Pokemon. And there are a lot of Pokemon this applies to, at least superficially. Muck, Voltorb, Chimecho, Drifloon, Trubbish, Vanillite, Lampent, Carbink, Palisand. But you have to look deeper. Voltorb could have been done better, yeah, but the whole point of it is that you walk up to an item and get an unexpected battle. It's a game design thing. It's inspired by the concept of mimics from D&D and other RPGs, where it's a monster disguised as a chest or some other item.
A similar thing can be said about Klefki, another Pokemon oft cited as signaling the drop in design quality. But Klefki's design is influenced by not only key rings, but by pagan fairies that steal keys. It also looks like a charm, a round metal medallion that pagans carry to ward off the very same key-stealing fairies. As an aside, it can also open its arms, which make it look more normal. It just chooses not to because otherwise it'll drop its keys. You see, in the anime, it does that.
And look at some of the detail on Drifloon. The cloud of hair, the pair of strings that act like arms, but especially that patch between the eyes. This balloon was popped and taped up. No wonder it's a ghost type.
Even Trubbish deserves a closer look. It completes the pollution trio with Coughing representing air, Grimer representing water, and Trubbish representing land. Trubbish is garbage, the kind that would end up in a landfill. And when you throw out your garbage, the bag is fairly intact with maybe just a small leak or two. But have you ever been to a landfill? The bags don't stay whole for long. The bags just get thrown into the heap together, and between that and the scavenging animals, they tear quickly. And you end up with a Garbodor, a giant pile of rotting trash with some torn plastic on top. They're ugly and gross on purpose. Plus, the designs are much more detailed and creative than other pollution Pokemon.
So our point in all this is that you can't just dismiss inanimate object Pokemon in general. Yeah, there are some bad designs, but bad designs are everywhere. You can watch my creature design reviews for that. And there are many inanimate Pokemon that are actually really successful. It is possible to make a good Pokemon from inanimate objects. A handful of the Ultra Beasts, Xurkitree, Celesteela, Kartana, all based on inanimate objects, and people tend to speak highly of them. And of course there's Metagross, who's a lot of people's favorite Pokemon, and is a supercomputer with design cues from lunar landers and UFOs.
Heck, I'd even argue in favour of the Vanillux line. It looks like ice cream, yes, but the snowy top is actually a defence and camouflage mechanism as detailed in the Pokemon entries. And ice cream in the Pokemon world was modelled after this Pokemon rather than vice versa. The message here is 9 times out of 10 there is actually a solid reason for the design of these Pokemon, and Game Freak don't just stick googly eyes on it and call it a day.
I want to thank Mew for joining me in this little discussion. Make sure to go over to their channel for the other collaboration that we did about gimmick Pokemon, another kind of Pokemon that gets a lot of flack. And I want to thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments below what you think of inanimate object Pokemon. Hopefully we helped you see them in a new light and be more accepting of them. Except Klinklang. Klinklang still sucks. And yeah, I know I'm saying that while wearing Klink 182. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Umbreon Libris, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Or psychic types like Bronzong. I wasn't supposed to be... Oh, I am supposed to say Bronzong. I thought... Wasn't I saying Bronzor?